So, Ari, in the last segment, you told us about the sort of travails of what took place in North Carolina over the past several weeks in regards to their gerrymandered districts. The opportunity for stuff happening like in North Carolina is limited to states that do have their own state constitution, that where questions of equal protection and in voting are implicated in these constitutions. There's another voting controversy in Tennessee. What's going on there?
Tennessee is a state where Republicans recently made it much harder to register to vote. They put up all of these new barriers to registration drives that could have actually criminalized registration drives, caused groups like the League of Women Voters to shut down registration drives there. This was viewed as being in a response to 2018 when 80,000 new African Americans were registered to vote in Tennessee, and then it was only after that that Tennessee decided to make registration harder. And so a federal court blocked this law and basically said it would have a chilling effect on voter registration, that there was no real evidence of voter registration fraud or improprieties that necessitated all of these different changes, and that, once you have an unfair election, there's no real way to correct it. And so this was some rare good news for voting rights.
That's good stuff. And let me ask you this, in terms of how many states are there, do you anticipate? And I'm still waiting for someone to bring a case in Pennsylvania. We saw them redraw the maps for the state reps. We haven't seen it in the context of the congressional districts, as far as I know. What are there other states where you think that there's an opportunity to see something like we saw in North Carolina?
Yeah, there are some other states. I personally think that there needs to be more litigation filed in state courts, because even before the Supreme Court said we're not going to review partisan gerrymandering, a lot of state courts actually have constitutions that have better protections for voting rights than the federal constitution does. And so, because there is no guarantee of voting rights in the federal constitution, but some state constitutions have more explicit language protecting voting rights in there. And so I'm surprised, for example, that no one has challenged the congressional maps in North Carolina in state court, because the congressional maps are as gerrymandered as the state legislative maps that were struck down. But I would imagine we're going to see more litigation before the 2020 election. But we're also kind of running out of time. I mean, it's already September 2019, and courts don't like to do these things right before an election.
Ari, what about Eric Holder? Wasn't Eric Holder running? I mean, wasn't there millions of dollars dedicated to this, and Eric Holder supposedly doing this?
Well, no, I mean, they are Eric Holder's group is filing lawsuits all around the country, but they're also doing other stuff, which is trying to win elections and actually trying to elect Democrats. And so they're, for example, focusing a lot of time on the 2019 elections that aren't getting any coverage in places like Virginia, that are going to decide who controls the state legislative process, and then who controls the redistricting process in places that have off-year elections. And I think they're trying to not only file lawsuits, but also work on electing Democrats down ballot, because I think the view is that these down ballot races, these state legislative races in particular, are being overshadowed by the presidential campaign, even though you could argue that these state legislatures have as much, if not more, of an impact on voting rights than who the next president will be, by virtue of controlling voting laws and also by virtue of controlling the redistricting process.
That's why I would have thought they would be. They would already be on top of these lawsuits. I mean, this is something that I feel like if Tom Steyer just took his, presidential clothing budget, probably he could fund this entire operation. But yet, this vanity run, I think, is far more important to him. All right, let's just turn our attention to the Supreme Court. You obviously cover the court quite a bit, particularly in the context of voting rights. But one person who I would imagine is fairly hostile to such rights would be Brett Kavanaugh. And there's been the release of a new book by some New York Times reporters. An excerpt was released, or I should say an opinion piece by the New York Times this week. A lot of people are complaining about the nature of the rollout, But two key takeaways. One was Brett Kavanaugh said, if I had done what one of the victims at Yale accused me of, it would be all over Yale. Everybody would know about it. And these reporters found out that, yes, in fact, it was all over Yale, and everybody did know about it. There was a second allegation presented by a guy who was a former clerk of Clarence Thomas's, who claimed that he saw a similar event where, Brett Kavanaugh, drunken Brett Kavanaugh, basically exposing everyone to his member, as it were. And so what's your takeaway from this? I mean, is this? I mean, it seems to me that at this point, the only thing that these stories have the ability to do is to edify the move to reform the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that there was no real FBI investigation. I mean, everyone knew this at the time, but the FBI was supposed to investigate these allegations. Senator Chris Coons, for example, told the FBI director that there was another witness to what went on at Yale who was very credible, and the FBI didn't even ever investigate it. So, I mean, it was a complete sham that they rushed to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. Had there been a thorough investigation, there was probably no way in which he would have been confirmed by an unbiased Senate. But I mean, they rushed this through. It was an example of, first they had a stolen seat that they rushed to fill with Neil Gorsuch, and then they had a seat that clearly should not have been filled by Brett Kavanaugh. And so now you really have, I think, two illegitimate members of the Supreme Court, one who occupies a stolen seat and one who occupies a tarnished seat, who should have never been confirmed in the first place. And obviously you can go even further back, and you could look at Clarence Thomas and the fact that he probably should have never been on the court. And then you can look at the fact that George W. Bush lost the popular vote and then named Sam Alito and John Roberts. So, I mean, pretty much every Republican appointed Supreme Court justice is illegitimate in one way or another, if you think about it. That way, or certainly did not go through the normal democratic processes. And I mean, I think Democrats have to deal something about this, because even if you elect a new president, you're still going to get 5 justices on the court that can pretty much nullify whatever that next president does. And I fully expect them to do that. And so I think we need to figure out what to do about the Supreme Court, and we need to have those conversations about changing it.
I think we're going to hear more of those going forward. Ari Berman, always a pleasure.